What is impossible? 150 years ago, this was impossible. 120 years ago, this was impossible. And 70 years ago, this was impossible. By 2050, our planet will be home to 9 billion people. And feeding everyone may seem impossible, but that's just because it hasn't been done yet. At Mosaic, helping the world grow the food it needs isn't just our job, it's our mission. Roughly half the world's crop yields depend on fertilizers. And like the scientists, engineers, and innovators before us, we believe new technologies can solve old problems.
Good morning, one and all. Randy's wrapped up with markets. I'm Don Wick. On behalf of the Red River Farm Network team, I'd like to introduce our crew if I could. We got Jay Rader in the back, Melissa Hammer, Tyler Donaldson, and you just heard Randy Conan with the markets as well. We're going to get started with the seminar beforehand in just a second here, but I would like to note just the day that we're meeting here on September 11th. I think we can, at least those of us old enough in the room, we can remember where we were on that date 23 years ago and all the lives that were lost. And certainly it's one of those life-changing days in all of our lives. So I think we should all take a moment to remember that and think about that as we go about our day today. We're going to have a conversation with the Ag Commissioners, both from North Dakota and Minnesota, and a lot of shared issues, I'm sure, and a lot of things that you're dealing with in your respective states. Begin with Doug Goring from the great state of North Dakota, and then Tom Peterson made the way from Minnesota, Minnesota Ag Commissioner Tom Peterson. First of all, gentlemen, welcome. Thank you for being with us.
Well, thanks for having us. Enjoy this. Looking forward to it.
Yeah. Let's talk about it. What are some of the hot topics you're dealing with right now? What's on your plate?
Oh, I didn't know I had to prioritize them. There's, between EPA, federal regulations, seems like every time we're turning around, we're having a comment on those. Whether you got the draft herbicide strategy, the insecticide strategy, they keep weaponizing endangered species, so that's certainly an issue. I would say that's more at the federal level. Shortfalls in our programs that the feds cooperate with us on, or we're a cooperator with them, maybe I'll put it that way. We're having some really serious issues there, and we're gonna have to work through those. I know my colleague in Minnesota, Commissioner Peterson's got issues. Wisconsin, clear across the entire United States, I'd say all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. We've all been feeling that pain and trying to address some of those things. Animal ag is certainly an issue. Labor is an issue. These are all things that we're concerned about, trying to work on, assist, and then issues like water conveyance, how you manage that. I saw Levi in the audience, and it made, yeah, that's right. That's almost a weekly issue, so yeah.
Tom, what's keeping you busy?
Well, I think right now too, just getting into harvest season or pretty far into it right now, and and the small grains and some issues there across the state, and it's not just unanimous in one area. We have areas up here in the valley where we had issues with the wheat and the wheat quality. I just talked to a farmer at 6:30 this morning who had just got a load of oats rejected for vermitoxin in southern Minnesota. We had so much rain south of 94, just a lot of different crops, 500,000 acres of prevent plant in Minnesota. And the interesting thing, just the yields, I think I worry about that. And a lot of years, with the prices that we have, that's, really concerning going into the fall with the price of corn and beans. And a lot of years, we have the low prices, but, we'll have the good yields, or something. And so you can kind of, build your way out of that or survive. But this year, I think we're going to have bad prices, and unfortunately, we're going to have some tough yields. Other big issue, we were talking about avian influenza, big state for Minnesota with turkeys, and being number one in turkeys. That's been a big issue as we've looked. But then as we've gotten into dairies and working through that. The good news is we, knock on, I don't have wood here, but, we haven't had any cases for well over a month. The migration's really changed. We did see 3 cases in dairy in California this week. You know, the virus has changed some because it's, you know, the last couple of years we had a lot of cases last fall, and those came through the bird migration, you know, but the cases we've been seeing were more moving farm to farm. And so that, working through that with dairy. And then building for a legislative session. We have a lot of dynamics happening in Minnesota right now as we look at our, we'll be setting our budget. I can't believe for like the 26, 27, and 28, 29 budget years, you know, and putting that all together and looking at a lot of uncertainties in Minnesota politics right now, so we'll see what happens. But no shortage of things to work on, Don.
I think we'll get into a lot of those subjects as the hour progresses here. There's no doubt the country's very divided. You're in a Democratic administration, you're Republican, Doug. I'm curious, what kind of cooperation do you see between states, and ag's probably not one of those areas where you see a lot of division. You got a lot of cooperation?
Yeah. No, I would say, and Tom can attest to this too, but at the national level, very, very little divergence from the issues. We stay focused on agriculture. It pretty much takes those barriers down. It doesn't matter whether you're Republican or Democrat, policies, positions, rules, regulations, they do just as much damage and harm. And if you don't see it, then you're probably a little blinded by your politics. But we work together. We have common goals, common interests, and we address them. I mean, I don't know, Tom, if you got much more to say to that.
No, I just say, you know, I think what's good for North Dakota and South Dakota and Iowa a lot of times is good for Minnesota, you know, and so if we're building plants here, or we're, you know, transporting stuff over to our Port of Duluth from the Dakotas, that helps everybody and it helps our area. So a lot of times we are competing more against maybe other parts of the United States as the Midwest. When we do trade missions, I've noticed that quite a bit, where, you know, they don't always want to talk to the commissioner from Utah, you know, but they want to have Doug or myself along with, you know, on some of these missions and put us front and center, you know, because we're the, you know, we have a lot of stuff to sell, you know, and we have a lot of products and things like that. And so, and then working in the agriculture space, it becomes, you know, sometimes is tough. Like right now we're seeing with the Farm Bill or things, but, you know, in general, our ag bills in Minnesota have almost, you know, since I've been commissioner, have been bipartisan. You know, I am glad to see that. We try to work through that. And so it's a good space to work in. I wish we could all do that. I say, like in the Farm Bill, you know, if our legislators could do it, Democrats and Republicans in Minnesota, we'd have it done, you know, and so, but it's a lot of other things happening right now for sure.
You mentioned the Farm Bill, and I know that's a federal issue, but the current Farm Bill expires here at the end of the month. I know the House is looking at trying to get a stopgap spending measure, but I don't believe any language to extend the Farm Bill is in the House bill that's being discussed at this point. Something's going to happen. If that Farm Bill expires, does that have any impact to your farmers?
Well, if an extension, that buys us a little more time. I really like what Ranking Member Bozeman had to say. He said, we want to get a Farm Bill done, but it has to be the right way, and it has to be without sacrifices. The proposals that have come from Washington have been a bit politicized, and there's been agendas inserted in there, which just doesn't really assist and support production agriculture. This is all about food security, and we need to leave the politics out of it. And unfortunately, they've put them in, or tried.
Does that change if we push this into 2025, or the politics are still going to be with us at that point? Just maybe with different players?
They may be, but I think some realization has got to come that we can't continue to push climate change through a food and farm and food security bill. Let's keep it pure, because we start to muck it up and we're going to have problems. And I'm not trying to be partisan about that. That's just the reality of it.
Mm-hmm. If we do move into 25, if I'm not mistaken, Minnesota Senator Klobuchar would be, at least in line, would be chairing the Senate Ag Committee, correct?
Potentially, or the ranking member, you know, one way or another. And, you know, and she's a good one too about working across party lines and you know, she's had Senator Bozeman here, I don't know how many times in Minnesota and been there. And, you know, we really see that. And so that's a great opportunity, not just for Minnesota, but the Midwest in general. And, you know, I listen to her and meet with her, and just the knowledge she has and the interest. We just had many meetings at the state fair with her and some different delegations. And so, but I do worry about the Farm Bill. I think the certainty of it is very important. Dairy is one piece, the dairy safety net. As we look at, you know, our farms in Minnesota that utilize those different programs, our trade assistance, all the different things, the certainty that we need is critically important. You know, we get, you know, important parts of our budget from the Farm Bill, whether that's, you know, different things with dairy inspection, meat processing, all these different things are important to have some stability. And so we'll see what happens. I don't see anything happening in the, you know, anytime soon, but I think, you know, once we get through the election, it'll go quick.
You mentioned climate, and certainly there's elements of climate in the Farm Bill, but we also had in the IRA, help me with the...
Yeah, Congress did
Inflation
pass
Reduction
some,
Act,
yeah.
right.
And
So is that a potential revenue source with low commodity prices? Is that something growers should be looking at?
well, it doesn't necessarily fit for everyone, and I think that's a little bit of the problem. They're talking about maybe this new scheme of cover crops, and quite frankly, keep in mind, North Dakota was the one that developed that whole concept in that system 30 years ago. And it's great. It has a wonderful place in the entire United States. But if you look at the way it's structured now and the way you participate, you have to do that as a double crop, put cover crops behind your crop. How do you do that in the upper Midwest? I mean, you got South Dakota, you have Minnesota, Wisconsin, and North Dakota. We can't. We're going to take our beans off and put a cover crop in to be compliant and to generate a little more revenue.
Yeah.
It's about soil health, so let us do what works best. And I like some of the things that have happened in recent years with some of the conservation programs. And certainly what's helped also is RMA changing the way they look at prevent plant acres. That's encouraged a lot more planting of cover crops, and it's led to more soil health.
I was around a table with a group of, I consider, very well-respected farmers, and talked about some of the carbon programs, both on the government side and the private side. And I think to a person, there was no trust to the programs. They just really were very cautious and weren't jumping in there. And these are individuals I would call early adopters, but they weren't in this particular arena. Why do you think that's the case?
Well, you know, I think one of the things with the climate, you know, and I think there is opportunities there for farmers, and I think a lot of the solutions to a lot of the issues are in the countryside for, you know, some of the climate things. And we're starting to see that in Minnesota. We're seeing a lot of overlap in our water quality programs that we need to do. We have a bigger nitrate issue in some parts of the state, and, you know, telling that story is really important, but we see climate benefits to the whether it's tillage or cover crops or different things. The problem, one of the things is with the early adopters, there's a lot of people, you know, that a lot of times they're not recognized, you know, and so they, you know, a lot of people have been doing, like Doug said, cover crops is not new for a lot of farmers, and so you just try to work through some of that. And I think that's one thing where you got to say, like, there's got to be a way to recognize some of that work that's been going on. But we see the tremendous interest, you know, whether that's, we have a soil health equipment grant right now in Minnesota. It's our third round of it, so farmers can get, now, you know, we've always said a loan program. And by the way, that loan program, we have over $100 million circulating in that program. And our need is 3-4 times that. And so we know the interest is there. We put in a grant program, and I think we have $2 million for this round. I think we just looked at almost $14 million in requests. But I can see when farmers are maybe very conventional looking at that, you know, in the conversations I have with them, they'll say that that grant is enough to kind of spur their interest to make that change and to get into that. And so I can see some real strong possibilities. And then you have the payments or different things that have come through the Climate Smart Commodity Program. There's over 30 of those different programs in Minnesota where farmers are maybe getting $100 an acre for cover crops. So you see real change. And so, but, you know, as you look at the contracts, and that's one thing that we've done as a department, we did a study with Farmers Legal Action Group to really look at those contracts and really talk to farmers about how do you look at that. Last thing I just say is how do we tie all this together? Because we have water quality programs, climate programs, you have your big companies like General Mills, Cargill, all these looking at how do they satisfy their world customers that are starting to ask these questions. Yesterday, I was at the airport with the Lieutenant Governor, and we did an announcement with Delta Airlines, with Bank of America, Ecolab, where Minnesota, we're going to start blending 60 million gallons of sustainable airline fuel. And that's tremendous interest, you know, for Minnesota. They're connected to that. We have Flint Hills Refinery has the pipeline directly to the terminal, and we're going to be, you know, working on that. But you got to tie all these things together too as well.
Kind of along that same line here in North Dakota, we've got the crush plant in Castleton and in Spiritwood. Still discussion in Grand Forks with Epitome. I don't know, where does that one stand? Do you have any idea with that project?
I believe it's still in the works.
Okay.
So we know of some infrastructure issues that need to be addressed, but
But they're all
not quite
targeted
sure,
for that
yeah.
sustainable aviation fuel market, correct?
yeah, either renewable diesel or sustainable aviation fuel, which most of that be derived from the ethanol market. Going back to the issue that you brought up about carbon, if you go back and you look in 2006, 7, and 8, that's when we destroyed a lot of trust with farmers. It was bad enough then, but after we came out of that and the government was trying to insert themselves into that carbon market, that created a lot more fear because it also perpetuated this whole issue about, well, if you're going to pay someone for carbon, you got to charge someone for carbon, which ends up being us as heavy energy users. The issue now that you see and you hear a lot from producers is they don't believe that the calculation is right on carbon. And it's interesting, you don't find correlation there. You don't necessarily see different crops, different practices, how that actually is sustainable. How are you counting carbon credits that you're sequestering on a farm? And I think we've become a lot more sophisticated and knowledgeable about plants, about soil health. The fact is, whether you're, and I'm just going to use North Dakota because I know it best,
That's right.
but eastern North Dakota to central North Dakota to western North Dakota, or even southern North Dakota to northern North Dakota, the different soils, the different crops, you've got 54 different commodities being produced in this state. You're going to be sequestering and harvesting carbon much different on each one of those. Now, we have 13 microclimates. Does that mean you need to do some studies in each one of those areas? Possibly. But at least when you start to find some similarities, that's what you need to work from. And quite frankly, there probably isn't a lot of trust in our universities and within the system itself, because what's been communicated is it feels like someone's trying to write a white paper or trying to get some recognition, and are they really serving agriculture well? It's interesting, I don't know if you heard of the green cow, which EcoSmart, they did a bunch of studies and they found out that in western North Dakota, under some certain systems and practices, they can produce a carbon neutral to a carbon negative cow.
Okay.
And through grazing practices, systems, the types of grass that's out there, but they had to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to do those studies over a period of time to really identify and define that. Now they're starting to move into global markets, because there's countries like Kazakhstan and the Middle East that are very much interested in having green beef, I guess you'd call it. And let's say that for what it is. It's
Be careful with that.
But that's the type of things that we need some honest data and research to really identify. Then we'll at least start to build some trust with producers about what do they believe they have out there. Secondly, government should not be involved in the market. What they should do is frame it up. and provide oversight and make sure there's proper enforcement and implementation. But the market should be private. Leave it as private. Let them compete against each other. They can turn around and charge the consumer. And if the consumer wants to buy that product off the shelf and pay that extra amount for it, great, let them do it. But don't put the government in the middle of that. I know we've actually had conversations a few years back as commissioners, directors, and secretaries, and there was pretty good sentiment about that. The government needs to stay out of the market side.
Tom, different but maybe related topic. Minnesota Pollution Control Agency is proposing feedlot permit changes. The current rule's expiring, correct? It does seem like there's a one-size-fits-all kind of approach with discussion about cover crops and some of those kind of things. I realize there's issues in the karst region down in southeast Minnesota, but farming there's a whole lot different than what we have here in the valley or what have you. Kind of what you're talking about, different climates. How do you do regulations and impact what they're doing in southeast Minnesota and what they're doing in Roselle County?
Yeah, and that's a really tough, thing that, I always say, and I don't know, it's maybe different for Doug, but probably a third of what I do every day has nothing to do with the Department of Agriculture directly. It has to do with the DNR or the PCA or the Department of Revenue. As you look at other agencies and trying to work through them, like what makes sense or, and I think that's one where, as we look at, how does it actually work? And so I do appreciate that the Pollution Control Agency put forward a set of rules. I was one to ask them to extend the rules extend the comment period so that farmers especially had more time to comment as I was around and visiting with folks, because you heard some of the different takes on, as we look at how do we, one thing Doug got into too was how do we, what's the measurement tool we're using to look at this. And I think that's one thing that's going to be really important with the MPCA that the Department of Agriculture is weighing in on how do we, quantify greenhouse gases? How do we, because we're looking at now what's the corn intake that we're taking in back into these feedlots and things like that is going to be really important. So we'll see, I think I have a couple of meetings with them coming up. They just closed the comment period here this last week. And we had a lot of comments from our different agriculture groups, really getting into the science, which I think is, sometimes like the Department of Agriculture can help with that as we look at just simple facts about animals and agriculture. But greenhouse gases, for example, really a tough piece. And to the PCA's credit, they're re-looking at that, because as we look at our greenhouse gas reductions across Minnesota, we've reduced a lot in the transportation sector, in the forestry sector, but they'll say in the agriculture sector, we haven't. And one thing I'll say is, like, we have to be honest about that. We could do a lot of things, so we may not get the reductions that everybody thinks we're magically going to have, and so we'll see. It's an ongoing piece as we look at trying to navigate through that for sure. And one other really important piece in this whole thing is Minnesota is under a petition by the EPA, by environmental groups, the Department of Agriculture, the MPCA, and the Department of Health over the nitrate levels of our drinking water. And not in this area in the valley, but in southeast Minnesota was where the 8 counties were petitioned by the EPA. But we also have the Central Sand Plains region, so a little south and east of here, and then southwest Minnesota, where we do have elevated signs of nitrates. And real quick, I would say that on the crop side, we can see things that we're doing. I think there's more things we need to talk about on the manure side of it.
I'm just curious, when you're saying a lot of your jobs talking about dealing with what MPCA is doing or DNR, what are those conversations like when you're really telling these guys' story at that table?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, but I think it's it's my role, to Minnesota, a big state government, big state, 5.7 million people, a lot of different dynamics in it, and I think that's really important. But it's another state agency, so I try to give them the benefit of the doubt and work with them. But I'll take greenhouse gases for an example. We look at dairy cows in Minnesota. One thing I always think is we see just simply my country math on dairy cows in our state. And we say, what's our population? I just said 5.7 million people. What is our cow population? It's dairy cows, 450,000. That hasn't changed for maybe 15 years. We've stayed at about that between 440 and 460,000 for about 15 years, really. But you go back, I went back and looked 50 years ago, Don. You know how many cows we had 50 years ago in the 50s? We had over 1 million cows, but we had half as many people. But the one thing we'll look at is they weren't concentrated, and so that's the different things that they're looking at and trying to see. But, I think it's respectful, and it's, permitting is an issue sometimes in Minnesota, and so I work on that a lot to try to see, like, okay, how do we have different standards or levels. We, working on trying to attract companies and keep them there, and try to get through that. But it can be difficult sometimes. I'm not going to say that too, but I feel like it's my role though to step in and work on that.
Doug, I'm curious. We've got 2 major dairies coming into this side of the state, really just across the border into Minnesota that are in the works. It's been a long time since we've had some of those kind of stories in North Dakota. Certainly there's some activity in the legislature in the past session or so, but what's changed? What do you see as the potential with the animal ag in North Dakota?
I think there's a lot of potential for animal ag in North Dakota. I hope it's 450,000 someday. Definitely spread out, but there's a lot of opportunity. We got a biosecure environment. We have the land, the space. Farmers are inviting animal agriculture into our communities because of what it does. It provides some more certainty. You're not putting everything down a pit to go on rail or on rubber and go someplace. That's a huge factor. And when it comes to manure, we lack so much of that would create another opportunity for producers to offset and defray some of their costs with fertility. So it's certainly something that's being embraced. The legislature has seen problems that have continued to exist in the last, I'd say, 6 to 8 years. They've started to incrementally address some of those. And the most recent was the anti-corporate farming law. They did some tweaking to it. Now, it still doesn't allow for some types of facilities, or at least a little more flexibility, but it has created enough, and it's sent a message across the nation, which is North Dakota is inviting animal agriculture into our backyard. So we'll see what happens.
Processing those got to be a challenge. That's been a...
Well, that isn't our deal. I know there's some. They come to the legislature and they darken my door and they say, hey, we're a state of plenty. We're so blessed. We're so fortunate. We should have a refinery. We should have a meat processing facility. We should have all this stuff. And I have to explain to them, if we're having problems trying to get rid of 1 million barrels of oil, wait till you have a dedicated product. We don't have a population to support, a refinery. Meat processing, you need the livestock, but you also need the labor to go along with that. There's different factors. When it comes to the processing side, having some conversations with those entities that want to bring cows to North Dakota, dairy, they're prepared to look at processing also. That's in their plans. And they would need about, if you're going to do a dry milk or a cheese facility, they're probably looking at the economies of scale and having to be somewhere around 100,000 cows to make that work. And there are wonderful opportunities across the world. We're seeing, economists have been talking about this, how dairy protein is continuing to rise clear across the globe, and they actually show it doubling within the next 12 years. So we're going to need cows. And we have rail, we have the ability to do this, we have the environment, so let's do it right. And the other thing I'd say is the types of facilities that are being talked about now, they're so modern, the technology, everything that's there, is gonna just put us in a position where they can actually be the poster child for animal agriculture. And that's really what we're banking on and hoping for, and working with these communities, working with the farmers, working with these dairies to make sure we can address the issues, our concerns, but also their concerns.
I would note, if folks have questions, give us a wave. We'll get a microphone in front of you. Always seem to think the best questions come from the audience anyway. Yesterday, we had a session on land values, and can't pull the stat out of my head right off top, but like in the next 10 years, 40 to 60% of the land's going to change hands because of the boomers are aging out and those kind of things. What's being done in each of your states to attract these young farmers into that ground?
Our state demographer, she always tells me in the next 20 years, 50% of the land will change hands in Minnesota. And so that's a lot, and we knew that. That's not a surprise. We had the silver tsunami, the baby boomers coming up, and seeing that. So Minnesota's been working, I think, really hard on different things. Our Rural Finance Authority, our number one loan is our Beginning Farmer Loan Program, and so seeing the types of interests, we work with local banks, and we see that has been very successful. We also have our Beginning Farmer Tax Credit, which I think is nation leading, which recognizes transferring from one generation to the next. So we just opened it up for family transfers. The first couple of years was only if it was, if you were buying it from somebody who is a non-family member, but now we've opened that up. And I always remember, I worked on this before I was commissioner, and they said they did a fiscal note. You get a fiscal note when you do a bill, and they said we'd have about 500 transactions a year. And I was like, that'll never happen. I was like, we're not going to have transfer that many, and lo and behold, that's about what we do a year, which is really good. I've had farmers, young farmers, come and tell me that's the only way I got that land was because of that tax credit. And so that has been very successful. In fact, to the point where we exhausted our dollars this year for the first time. And so now we need to go to the legislature, because it's incredibly important to have that transfer piece. The other thing we've been working is building out our FarmLink program, where we connect a lot of farmers who are working with that next generation, or somebody getting into that too as well. So there's a lot of work going on in that. Supporting our farm business management in our state too is incredibly important. And then our farm advocates, we have 10 of those in Minnesota that work with farmers that are in financial distress. I always think that's important. We talk about the next generation, but I think it's incredibly important that we do everything we can to keep the current generation we have. I have this talk sometimes with our current administration and different things, because beginning farmer programs are important, but I think a lot of times our policies get in the way to keep the farmers that we have. And so just making sure that we have those advocates, and a couple of the advocates are specifically trained now in helping transfer and having farmers do that. I just went through that with my own family, and it's incredibly important when you have brothers and sisters and trusts and wills, and how do you do that when one of the people or couple want to keep farming that land? And so a lot of good things going on. There's always things we can do more, but I'm proud of the efforts that we've taken to address that.
Doug, what about you, and again, bringing that next generation?
So we do have some programs in place that we use through the Bank North Dakota, and it helps, but here's part of the problem. I've had some gentlemen that were looking at retiring. This would have been several years ago, maybe even the last 3-4 years now that I think about it. They'd call up and they'd say, "What are you doing about helping those young farmers and ranchers get started?"
That's how they
say
talk.
we're yeah, and it'd be like, "Well, we're trying to do this and that," and then they'd turn around, retire, and they'd sell their land, and they'd sell it to not even in-state, out-of-state interest. North Dakota's dealing with something probably a little bit different than others, in that I have Pennsylvania, New York, Ohio, Wisconsin, Michigan, little from Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota. They're coming to North Dakota and they're buying land, but they're buying their slice of heaven, and it's mainly for recreation. So the problem is They kick the cows off and they tell the farmers, you're not farming it anymore. And they come back and they go hunting and they put up a $700,000 lodge out on it and some over $1 million. But it's destroying our communities. It's almost, well, it is. It's worse than CRP because it's probably going to take 30 years before we get that back out or someone decides to sell it. And that's a concern. The other thing is, and I've had some conversations with USDA about this, CRP maybe saved our farmers at times, but it's had the wrong effect and impact on our beginning farmers and ranchers. And I know this is probably going to offend some of the guys that are looking at retiring soon, but quite frankly, how are we going to transfer some of this land into some of their hands and have them work with their folks? Because in many cases, they still need to be on the farm paying and servicing debt and assisting the next generation. So we got to be a little careful that we're not competing against that. And CRP has at times, again, came back to pushing rents higher in my area, making it tougher for a lot of these younger guys to compete against that. They'd rather just get that certainty of that check from the federal government.
Even just the viability of a small community.
Yeah.
When that land's taken out of production, we've all seen what impact that's had over the years.
Yeah. Sheridan County was a great example. I think they maxed out, had 25% of their land put in CRP, and it was devastating to them for about 25, 30 years.
Both of you are very active on international trips, going out and telling the North Dakota and the Minnesota story around the globe. I'm curious, what's on the docket? You guys got some things planned. Where do you see the most opportunity for your respective states?
Yeah, I really look at Doug, when you talk about something, you look at Doug, really, learn a lot. It wasn't something that I started with as commissioner. It wasn't like experience that I had. And so I appreciate the knowledge and ideas Doug's given me on travel and the importance of it. And you look at kind of as a commissioner, you're kind of the chief cheerleader for agriculture in your state, trying to bring different ideas, to the state. And yesterday when I was saying we had SAF and we had the different folks at we had a lot of the embassies at the airport looking at that because they look at those destinations. They have those greenhouse gas goals. So like the United Kingdom, very important for us. We have a group here in North Dakota and Minnesota this week, a large trade delegation for edible beans. And edible beans, the UK is our #1 destination for that. And so building those pieces, we've been working very hard in Minnesota, reinvigorating the Port of Duluth and just seeing a lot of good. We have a new mill in there, which has been really helpful, and they've been doing a lot of different things. And again, coming from North Dakota, it could be sugar beet pellets, it could be wheat, small grains, different shipments of that coming out. We fit well into like the Moroccan port. Africa is amazing. It's really going from low class to middle class, and you see Morocco, for example, our type of ships fit well into their port, and kind of a gateway to Africa. I'm really interested in Southeast Asia. I see, obviously Japan, Korea, we could talk about China all day, great markets, for us. But, you look at these developing, Southeast nations, whether it's like Bangladesh or Malaysia, Philippines, and one thing I look at, you look at the average age. It struck me, Doug and I were just mentioning Philippines. The average age is in the 20s. You look at China or Japan in the 40s. Those are the developing nations where, we compete against building our foothold in those. And so, and one other thing I'd say on trade, Doug mentioned dairy, and it's interesting because a lot of times we focus in Minnesota on corn, soybeans, wheat, but it's interesting how many times dairy started to come up in trying to move those different products. And so I can see a lot of potential. And again, changing diets, a lot of different potentials there. So I'm pretty excited. This week, for example, we've had groups from Denmark. We have a big group from Uzbekistan. Again, really developing. They're going to be here on Friday and spend a few hours at the department with both the department and the soybean growers. The soybean growers in Minnesota put a lot of work into that. But this is their third trip here this year, and so as they look at those, different potentials, I just, always really excited about the possibilities. Of course, Minnesota, we're lucky to have Cargill and General Mills and CHS and Land O'Lakes and Hormel and all these companies that work internationally. And so it gives us a good profile. And again, that can help, all of the states in the upper Midwest. So I think a lot of positives on trade. I do think, like, not to get super political, but looking at the election, I do think, and I've encouraged and talked to the governor about the need for more deals, I think, because right now I think it's kind of states are, helping to make those deals and connections and things like that. We're not seeing like the big, free trade agreements or things like that. But in certain cases like Morocco, we have an agreement with them. It helps open up those borders.
No,
What do you think, Doug?
That's absolutely right. We need to look at more bilateral and multilateral trade agreements. That is a big deal. In fact, if you go back and you look at TPP, if we could have passed that, that would have leveraged and put us in a strategic position in Southeast Asia, and it also would have kept China, at the border. It would have pushed back on them and gave us better leverage in those markets. We produce a lot of protein in the upper Midwest. That puts us in a good place and positions us well when you start looking across the whole entire globe. The Western Hemisphere is a good market we got to continue to work on, especially the dry beans, the peas, the lentils, the pulse crops. You also have the ability to keep, two of our larger trading partners are actually Mexico and Canada.
Right.
So we got to continue to build on that. But Southeast Asia, the Middle East to some degree, Africa is a wonderful market. The problem with Africa, and as much as we've studied it and looked at it, and I served on the advisory committee for XM Bank, and I had Sub-Saharan Africa as in my portfolio, it's just the political unrest that exists there. If you can address some of that, the political unrest, we can quickly get into those markets and we can actually start developing and building them. Unfortunately, what China has done, and they've taken a position of doing this, actually, if I was them, I probably would have done it too, but it's a little devious and underhanded too, so I'm not sure. But they would go into a market, build out a rail system, infrastructure, ports, and then when the country couldn't actually make their payments in default, they would just foreclose and take it back, and then they'd operate it. But it gets them a foothold, and that worries a lot of those countries. They don't want to be in that position. So there's things to build on. There's things that we can do, continue to do. I think the fact that, and keep in mind, the public in general and consumers across the U.S. don't necessarily understand this whole trade issue, but they really lack an understanding about the impact agriculture has. Keep in mind, we're less than 2% of the population. We're actually closer to 1% of the population in production agriculture. We employ in North Dakota about 25% of the workforce. Nationally, agriculture supports 29% of the workforce. Now, think a little bit beyond those borders. 95% of the world's population exists outside of our borders. 80% of the buying power in the world exists outside of our borders. And 92% of the middle class growth that's going to happen in the next 25 years is taking place outside of our borders. And to Tom's reference about the Philippines, their demographics, I believe it's 40%, 60% of those under the age of 26 is their demographics. That's their market. They're pushing for change, and it's helping because they want our products. We're not selling to poor people. Let's put that on the table right away. We have programs that help assist, but when you have high quality products, you're selling to middle class citizens around the world. So that's our market. We provide the safest, most abundant, and affordable food when it comes to a higher class, higher quality food in the market.
Both Minnesota and North Dakota are very diverse states. I don't know how many commodities you mentioned earlier.
54.
54. That is an amazing stat for North Dakota. Minnesota the same, whether it's hogs to turkeys to the dry beans you talked about, sugar beets. We got a lot of different things. How does that help you, particularly on international sides or trying to tell that North Dakota, Minnesota story?
Well, just like Tom said, first thing they do is they put us front and center because we have about everything
Yeah.
that they're looking for. It's just a matter of, can we work out the logistics and the price, and maybe it fits a certain niche in their markets, but
There
yeah.
can't be too many more states outside of like California and maybe Michigan that have that much.
I think the first trade mission I went on, and not being a pro like Doug and kind of being new to it, was we do USDA missions where they, we go along and everything. And again, if it's a commissioner, the first mission I was on, I was with Virginia, Florida, and Utah. I was not to pick on Utah a lot, but they were just like, you're gonna do the greeting, you're gonna go front and center, and because I listened to the Virginia commissioner, and they have whiskey and
And wood.
something else, and
Whiskey
ham or
and wood.
something. But it was like they don't have ham like we have ham, and it's great, but they do not have like the infrastructure or anything, and so it is really interesting where you're, and I would say too, as I travel, the country, it's amazing the connections that Minnesota had. I mentioned all the countries, but I'd mention our university, University of Minnesota. Everywhere I go, we've been in Australia, Philippines, the big feed companies in the Philippines, the owners, they all sent their kids to the University of Minnesota to learn business. Australia, they all sent the people to the University of Minnesota and partner with us on Rust. Morocco has an exchange program with the University of Minnesota and educated, in fact, many ag educators. In fact, the secretary or Minister of Agriculture holds his PhD from the University of Minnesota. So there's a lot of doors that open for Minnesota and the upper Midwest because of the university system too, which I think is very interesting. So, again, a lot of possibilities, but, just trying to capture those, opportunities are always, to me, it's exciting. It's challenging, but it's, something, one of my favorite parts that I've learned about being commissioner.
I would piggyback on what he said.
Yeah.
We have Northern Crops Institute here, which
Yes,
is
yeah.
Montana, South Dakota, Minnesota, and North Dakota. They are known globally because of the technology, the equipment. They put programs on to help educate the millers, to educate bakers, anybody that's buying commodities. They bring them in, they help. They're known globally, and us four states get a lot of recognition for that. It's a great facility, good institution.
NCI right down front and center, so.
Yeah.
That's true. It's very true. We hosted a lot of the different Northern Crop delegations again in Minnesota, and just interesting to sit and see people from all over the world, but also to bring them in to show them our products. They want to kind of see that. How does the wheat turn into bread, and how does it? Those are the type of things that we're able to do sometimes that other countries that we compete against aren't, and so we do have that as very helpful.
The expertise on milling and how you can best get more nutrition out of it. How can you extract more of that volume out of something, just the way that you manage it, handle it. That is just awesome. You hear people rave about it, whether you're in Vietnam or you're in Thailand or you're in Korea.
Yeah. I'm curious, what's keeping you guys awake at night? What are some of the biggest risks you're seeing out there this day and age? Tom?
Yeah, I think it always just goes down to me to the price for farmers. I think as, I'm not an active farmer anymore, but all my neighbors, relatives, I do feel, this has been a challenging year with the weather and I don't know, since I've been commissioner, I just feel like it's been, 2019, we had the wettest year on record in Minnesota. We left a lot of potatoes and beets, and 2021, we had the worst drought in 50 years.
This is all your fault.
The windiest year on record in 2022, another drought in 23, and I don't know what we call this year, you know, and so you just look at those type of things. And, you know, if you look at cash flows this year, it's going to be challenging and going to take a lot of creativeness, you know, on behalf of farmers. And then, you know, and then we talked a little bit about it before, but the avian influenza, you know, did hit Minnesota pretty hard. I'm really proud of the work that we've done in Minnesota. We have tremendous relationships with the USDA, the Board of Animal Health, our animal associations to work through it, you know, and work together, because that's what we had to do to, like, you know, because that's another important trading piece, you know, as we have, for example, the Philippines, you know, put a stop sale on our poultry, you know, and so we need to get those markets back opened. And again, work together on that. So those are a couple of things that I think about, you know, all the time, you know, and I think farmers are, you know, I try to make myself available to them and be around, and that's hard, you know, and so I'd always want to see the best price we could see for farmers, and just have a year where everything goes extremely smooth. So that'd be my thing, I'd say.
Hey, gentlemen, sorry, Don, to interrupt. We're running short on time. We have a couple of questions, if you don't mind. Great.
Well, I want to thank the three of you for the great conversation this morning. Emily Kreckelberg with Minnesota Extension, and want to switch gears a little bit. Next week is National Farm Safety and Health Week, and so I'm just curious, both commissioners, what the conversations have been recently in your departments and kind of what your priorities are moving forward for farmer safety, health, and well-being.
Yeah, you know, I think that's another top priority for us. I think, you know, again, appreciate the partnerships we have. The Farm Bill is a good example, and I'd say a bipartisan piece that we worked with in that, because I think a lot of farm safety comes down to farm stress. Unfortunately, when we have accidents in Minnesota, I know a lot of the farmers, we just lost somebody in a bin accident, you know, and I'll call or talk to the family, they'll say, oh, he was just working too hard. He was under a lot of stress. And I know that from my own farm. I know when I'm stressed out, I go work, and I work, and you know, and you cut corners and different things. And so we talk a lot about stress. The one thing the Farm Bill had that was bipartisan was authored by Tom Emmer, a Republican, and Senator Tina Smith was the Farm Stress Act. That's in this most drafts of this next Farm Bill. It's got each state some money to work on farm stress and farm safety. And so that's been a big piece. We have 2 mental health counselors in our state. We have a hotline. And the advocates that we have that I mentioned, but we also have grain bin assistance, safety assistance. We've had the tractor rollover program for a long time to help cost share that, but a new thing our legislature's fund, I didn't say a new thing, it's been about 5 years now, where we have bin safety equipment, really seeing a lot of uptake on that. I also want to, you know, thank Farmers Union and Farm Bureau, the commodity groups, for a lot of the work they do, our companies, and helping our fire departments have those tubes and harnesses and equipment as well. So kind of all the above, but always the top priority. Like I say, we need every farmer.
Couple minutes left. Doug?
I would say that certainly when it comes to farm safety, there's a lot of material out there. Are people grabbing it? Are they looking at it? I'll tell you no, because to Tom's point, you get busy, you put your head down, you got long days in, it's harvest time. You don't put the auger down before you cross the yard. Things just, they're not working in that frame of mind. But one of the things, because when you have market conditions and you have crop conditions like they are, when you look at mental health, that is a big deal. So trying to provide those resources. We have a credit counseling program along with our mediation program, trying to work with farmers, make sure we're accessible. It's confidential. Talk to us. The hotline is another resource. If you can help people work through that, they can work a little bit clearer or have a little bit clearer head to hopefully avoid some of those mishaps. But you can put a lot of stuff in front of them, and I'm not using this as an excuse. It's just they tend to neglect or ignore it. So you can beat them over the head and they still may do it, but at least if you can address some of the ancillary issues, you might be able to get them to think about that like they would in a normal situation.
You used the word accessible, and I got to say for both of you guys, you're putting in a lot of windshield time, you're out and about, you're meeting with your constituents, the farmers, and those that get served by farmers each and every day. couldn't think of two better cheerleaders for the business of agriculture. I want to thank you both for being with us at Big Iron.
Thanks, Don.
Thanks, Don. Appreciate the opportunity.
Doug Gore and Tom Peterson, please show your appreciation. I think they've done a great job.
What is impossible? 150 years ago, this was impossible. 120 years ago, this was impossible. And 70 years ago, this was impossible. By 2050, our planet will be home to 9 billion people. And feeding everyone may seem impossible, but that's just because it hasn't been done yet. At Mosaic, helping the world grow the food it needs isn't just our job, it's our mission. Roughly half the world's crop yields depend on fertilizers. And like the scientists, engineers, and innovators before us, we believe new technologies can solve old problems. Our diverse team of talented people around the world is helping us feed the world by approaching old challenges in new ways, enhancing soil and crop health, pioneering new ways to help plants thrive in stressful conditions, enabling farmers with digital access to agriculture products, sustainable practices, and insights from around the world, deepening our commitment to protecting the environment, creating biologicals that enable plants to pull nitrogen directly from the atmosphere, slow climate change, and promote sustainable farming, fortifying our supply chain, and strengthening our ability to get fertilizer to farmers, automating our operations, manufacturing safer and faster, and finding efficiencies to help make food more abundant. We're even helping farmers grow more food with less fertilizer. With the world's population soon to reach 9 billion, Mosaic does more than imagine an impossible future. We design it, engineer it, and build it. So, what is impossible? It's just something that hasn't been done yet. Mosaic. We help the world grow the food it needs.